The Judean hills hold the heat of the day long after the sun has vanished. Night settles over the landscape, bringing with it the dry, sharp scent of parched grass and the musk of restless sheep. A small group of shepherds sits in a tight circle, their backs to the jagged limestone outcrops that define the ridge. The fire in the center is dying, reduced to a bed of pulsing orange embers that cast long, erratic shadows against the stones. One man shifts, his weight grinding against the grit of the earth, and he tosses a final handful of brush onto the coals. A brief flare of light illuminates the faces of his companions, then fades back into the deepening gloom. The wind carries a low, rhythmic rustle through the scrub, the only sound in a vast, empty darkness. They are accustomed to this solitude. He simply reaches out, taps the edge of the fire pit with his staff, and stares into the cooling embers, waiting for the dawn. The silence shattered. It did not fade. It was torn open. Without warning, the black expanse above the ridge was obliterated by a white-hot, piercing radiance. It was not the gradual rise of dawn, but a sudden, absolute inversion of the night. The darkness vanished, replaced instantly by a glare so intense it felt physical, like a weight pressing against the skin. The shepherds reacted before their minds could process the source. Wooden staffs clattered against the limestone as they slipped from nerveless fingers. Every man in the circle threw his hands up, fingers splayed, palms pressed hard against his brow to block the searing intensity. The light was absolute, turning the jagged rocks into blinding white silhouettes and washing the color from the dry grass. It was a noonday glare forced into the heart of midnight. They scrambled backward, boots scraping against the loose shale, trying to find purchase in a world that had suddenly lost its shadows. The fire, moments ago, the only source of light, was now invisible, swallowed by the brilliance pouring from the sky. They were exposed, blinded, and reeling, their bodies hunched low as they instinctively turned away from the source of the eruption. The night was gone, and in its place, a terrifying, unyielding brightness held them captive. Then the sound began. It was not a noise heard by the ears, but a low-frequency vibration that traveled through the soles of their boots and rattled the marrow of their bones. The air thickened, turning heavy and stagnant, resisting every movement. One shepherd tried to stand, his muscles coiled for flight, but his knees buckled instantly as if the gravity of the earth had doubled. He clawed at the air, his fingers grasping for support, but found only empty, vibrating space. He hit the ground hard, his chest slamming into the grit and dry earth. He did not try to rise again. The vibration intensified, a rhythmic thrumming that synchronized with his own frantic heartbeat, forcing it to slow against his will. He pressed his face into the dirt, the sharp stones biting into his cheek, but he could not pull away. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps that barely reached his lungs. Every instinct demanded he run, but his limbs were leaden, locked by a primal, suffocating weight. He was no longer a man in control of his path. He was a witness to an intrusion that shattered the laws of the natural world. He lay pinned to the hillside, trembling. Miles away, in the quiet of Nazareth, the world held its breath. Mary sat in the center of her home. The only sound, the rhythmic, faint crackle of an oil lamp. The flame cast soft, amber flickers against the stone walls, painting the room in familiar, steady shadows. She reached out to adjust the wick, her movements slow and deliberate in the stillness. Then, the air within the room began to ripple. It was not a sound, but a distortion of the atmosphere, like heat rising from a desert floor. The warm, orange glow of the lamp suddenly faltered. It did not flicker out. It was bleached away. The light shifted, draining the room of its comfort, turning sharp and cold. The shadows on the wall stretched, twisted, and then vanished. A crystalline intensity began to bleed into the space, a clarity so absolute it felt like looking through glass that had been shattered. The air grew thin and static, raising the fine hairs on her arms. The familiar geometry of the room seemed to bend, the corners receding into a depth that should not have existed. Mary stood, her back pressed hard against the stone wall. The space in the room did not merely change, it fractured. From the center of the distortion, a form emerged that defied human anatomy. It was a mass of shifting wings and countless eyes, each one fixed on a different corner of the room, each one seemingly peering into the hidden depths of her own mind. The light radiating from the being was not a glow, but a searing, cold pressure that forced the air from her lungs. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic, rhythmic thudding that echoed in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. She did not see a messenger of peace. She saw an engine of divine intent, a pillar of holiness that made the stone walls feel fragile and temporary. Her legs lost their strength, the muscles failing under the sheer weight of the being's presence. She sank to the floor, her hands gripping the cold ground, to keep from shaking apart. The entity did not move, yet it filled every inch of the room, its gaze pinning her to the earth. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. Then, the entity moved. It did not shift its position, yet the air vibrated with a sudden, violent resonance. The voice arrived, not as words spoken in the air, but as a sound that manifested directly within the marrow of her bones. It was the sound of 1,000 waves crashing against a single, jagged cliffside, a roar that carried the weight of an ocean. Mary pressed her palms into the dirt floor, her knuckles white, as the sheer volume of the sound threatened to tear her consciousness apart. It was a command that bypassed her ears and struck her mind with the force of a physical blow. "Do not be afraid." The words were not a request for calm. They were a structural necessity. The command acted as a tether, a rigid bridge of sound, stretched across the abyss between the finite and the infinite. She remained on the floor, breathing in the static, charged air. These encounters are not isolated events. History records the same violent collisions between the mortal and the divine. Ezekiel stood by the river Chebar and saw the heavens open, witnessing a storm of fire and light that defied geometry. He described wheels within wheels, a complex, spinning machinery of brilliance that moved in perfect, terrifying unison. The sight was not a vision to be contemplated. It was a force that drained the marrow from his bones. Daniel, too, collapsed before the presence of such entities, his strength replaced by the cold, trembling realization of his own mortality. These men were left shattered, unable to stand, their bodies failing under the proximity to raw, unadulterated authority. The accounts speak of brightness that burns the eyes and a presence that makes the earth beneath them feel like shifting sand. The human frame is not built to contain the weight of such reality. Every nerve ending fires in protest, every muscle locks. The angel exists as a singular extension of a higher will, a conduit for a reality that operates beyond human negotiation. This is not a conversation between equals. It is a declaration of truth that demands an immediate, total response from the witness. When the messenger stands in a room or on a hillside, the environment shifts to accommodate a presence that does not recognize human boundaries. The angel is a herald of an authority that renders all previous plans and perceptions obsolete. There is no space for debate or hesitation. The message delivered is a pivot point, a moment where the trajectory of a life is permanently altered by the weight of the information provided. To hear this voice is to be confronted with a reality that requires an absolute, life-altering commitment. The human witness is not asked for an opinion. They are presented with a mandate that strips away the comfort of their former existence. Every word spoken by the entity functions as a structural change in the fabric of the listener's world. It is a command that forces the individual to stand, to act, and to accept a new, undeniable truth. The encounter demands a response that is as final as the messenger itself. The encounter concludes, but the world remains fundamentally altered. The silence that follows is not a return to normalcy. It is a heavy, ringing void where the human witness stands exposed. All the layers of identity, status, and expectation that once defined the individual are stripped away, leaving only the raw, trembling reality of existence. There is no pretense left to hide behind. The gap between the creator and the created is not a distance to be measured in miles, but a chasm of essence that no mortal effort can bridge. In the shadow of the eternal, human ambition and daily concerns shrink until they are invisible. The witness is left with a singular, crushing realization that they are finite, fragile, and entirely dependent on a force that operates on a scale beyond comprehension. This is the final truth of the threshold. It is not an invitation to comfort, but a demand for perspective. The individual looks at their own hands, the ground beneath their feet, and the vast, uncaring sky, and sees them for the first time as they truly are. Small, temporary, a flicker of life in the presence of an unyielding, infinite light. The encounter does not end with a feeling. It ends with a permanent shift in gravity. The human is no longer the center of their own story. They are a guest in a reality that was never theirs to control. They stand, they breathe, and they acknowledge the vast, unbridgeable distance that separates the dust of the earth from the majesty of the divine. The realization is absolute, cold, and final.